Right, hi, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to look quickly at the nitrogen cycle. So the nitrogen cycle is extremely important, but doesn't get the same hype that the carbon cycle gets. So the carbon cycle gets so much attention just because people are concerned about global climate change and how humans are impacting the amount of carbon that's being released into the atmosphere, and that's associated with higher global temperatures, which we discussed in class today. But the nitrogen cycle is also extremely important. It's also a good place where we'll see one of those systems diagrams as well. So we already looked at the basics in class. We're just going to review them. So 78% of the atmosphere is made of nitrogen in the form of N2. So N2 is an inorganic molecule. It's just two nitrogen atoms that have a chemical bond and they're stuck together. Now, N2, it's extremely abundant in the atmosphere, but it cannot be used by the vast majority of organisms, and that includes plants and animals. That means us. So we cannot use nitrogen from the atmosphere, not directly. And we really, really need nitrogen. So in fact, all living organisms require nitrogen. They require nitrogen because they need to build proteins, and proteins are essential for life. So if you think back to your biology class, if you think about proteins perhaps in the form of enzymes, like we require enzymes to survive as human beings. So if we didn't have them, we couldn't survive. We need to have nitrogen in the proteins, or specifically within those amino acid building blocks of the proteins as well. So how do we get it? All right. Really, bacteria are the key players in nitrogen fixation, okay? So bacteria are the key players within this nitrogen cycle. They're the ones that can pull nitrogen out of the atmosphere. In fact, they can actually return it to the atmosphere as well. So we see bacteria can take the N2 from the atmosphere and make it into usable forms for other organisms. So these are nitrogen fixing bacteria. Remember we said if they're fixing it, they're taking it from the atmosphere and putting it into a usable form. Okay? And then bacteria, in fact, just to cover the point, can return nitrogen back to the atmosphere. And these are denitrifying bacteria, so that's just the name for them. They return the nitrogen back to the atmosphere. Okay? So I decided today that I would get crazy and draw a diagram. This is not like the diagrams or the drawings I guess I've seen from some of you. In fact, I saw some amazing diagrams, not diagrams, I don't know why I keep saying diagrams, some amazing artwork from the class in Mr. Riley's classroom. So it's not going to be that impressive, I'm sorry, but this is my diagram. So we're looking at the nitrogen cycle. Remember, here we've got lots of stores and flows, so I labeled some of the key things that we need to know. So first off, our main store of nitrogen that we're looking at starts in the atmosphere, so we can encircle that if we want to. Okay, so we have that atmospheric nitrogen in the form of N2. And there's really two main ways that it gets taken out of the atmosphere. So in fact, nitrogen can be removed partially by lightning, so that can help with that nitrogen fixing process, even though that might seem shocking. And the other way, and the main way, is by nitrogen fixing bacteria, and we often refer to leguminous plants. In fact, when we read the case study on Mount St. Helens, we talked about lupins, and it said that the lupins, or lupines, however you want to say it, that the lupin flowers are leguminous. So the leguminous just means that they contain little bacteria. So in their root system, this is supposed to be a zoom in. So if we zoom into the root, within their roots, they have these little nodules. And in those nodules, there's a little culture of bacteria. So the bacteria within their roots are able to fix nitrogen. So that means that they, along with the bacteria that they carry, can take nitrogen out of the atmosphere and to convert it into usable forms for organisms. So that's pretty cool, all right? That's a pretty awesome relationship that these leguminous plants have with the bacteria. So these are the two main ways. We have lightning assisted with some nitrogen-fixing bacteria, and then we have these leguminous plants with their bacteria that they carry. Okay? This helps create nitrates in the soil, and this is kind of what we're shooting for. So nitrates are our usable form of nitrogen for most plants. So once we have this, so nitrates in the soil, then plants can absorb the nitrates and they can assimilate them. And this is a word in the IB guide, right? It's also just a general word that we use often, even culturally, like if you talk about people assimilating into a culture. So this time we're talking about the assimilation of nitrogen. So if you think about assimilating, okay, really we're saying that the nitrogen becomes part of the plant. Okay, so it becomes part. They're like unified, right? So if we're talking about people who are assimilating into a culture, I think about them like kind of taking on that culture. Okay, so they really become unified. They become one with that culture, right? So similar with the nitrogen. If the nitrogen is being assimilated, it becomes part of the plant, right? So the absorption and assimilation happens here. So the nitrates move into the plants, so that's our key step. Once they're in the plants, then they're in the food web, okay? So we get the nitrogen then into our, whatever our producers are. Then, once it's in the plants, so once it's in most plants, and these are plants that, these ones are non-leguminous. I think I'm going to go OUS, hopefully that's correct. So non-leguminous, so they don't carry their own bacteria. So they don't have this same relationship, this same partnership here that's happening with the leguminous plants. These are our other plants, okay? And in fact, the vast majority of plants are not, they're non-leguminous. They're not plants that have their own bacteria to fix nitrogen. So we're worried about the nitrogen getting in here into these plants because then it can get into the food web. So if we look from here, now that it's in our producer, it can start entering our consumers. So I decided I would draw this beautiful bird. I know you guys are probably very proud of me. It looks like a bird, I think. So now just through eating, okay, the animal now contains the nitrogen that it needs to make the proteins that it needs to survive. And of course, we know eventually if we wait, these organisms, they will die, okay? They also defecate, they produce waste. And once that happens, there will be some decomposition, right? So decomposition will occur, and I tried to add my little organisms here, so I have bacteria and a little worm and fungi, just helping to break down this organism, okay? Helping to break down the animal. So it will slowly break down, and then I made a little mistake here, so it should say nitrogen in soil as ammonia, but I accidentally got a little thing on the next to my L, so don't worry about that. But the nitrogen in soil is ammonia, so that's NH3, so this is just a different form of nitrogen. If you think about ammonia, I don't really look for ammonia because it's really quite a harsh chemical, so it's very basic. By basic, I mean like on the acid-base scale. It's very basic. It kind of functions similar to bleach, so you can use it as a cleaner. And similar to bleach, it has a really strong smell, but it doesn't have the same smell as bleach. Also, like a bleach, it's like a poison. Like it would be, extremely poisonous in high concentrations for you. So if you ever drank it, that would be the end. So we're looking at nitrogen in the soil as ammonia, and this is not an accessible or usable form of nitrogen for organisms. Okay, so in fact, once that gets into the soil, it again has to be broken down. So we have to have, or not necessarily broken down, but it has to change forms. So we have to go back to the end-fixing bacteria, and they can actually convert these ammonia compounds back into the nitrates. And the nitrates, that's what we need, again, for the other organisms to use. So bacteria, again, are key players. Okay, so they're able to convert the nitrogen into forms that are usable for most things. Now, of course, This is a cycle, so there has to be a way for it to return to the atmosphere, and bacteria take that on as well. So there are bacteria, those denitrifying bacteria, that can remove the nitrogen from the nitrates in the soil and convert it back into N2, and it can re-enter the atmosphere. So this is, in short, the nitrogen cycle, right? So you're responsible for understanding this concept, so the movement of the nitrogen from the atmosphere into the living world, into the living realm. Okay, I think, to be honest, on an IB test, I don't think that they're going to ask you about chemicals like this, but it is good to know if you are actually interested in studying, ecology or biology in the future. You're going to be required to know a little bit about this, so it's a good thing to start memorizing if you can. Right, but what we're really looking at is this process of the nitrogen again moving from this inorganic world, the atmosphere, into the living world, because it is again necessary for life. So just thinking about that process as well as how it can exit. So we need to be aware that anything that can move into the living world can also move out of the living world. Okay, that's what makes it a cycle. So please let me know if you have questions. Again, for Monday, I did say I will not be there on Monday. So if you have any questions that you really want to ask, just email me. I can get back to you as soon as possible. All right? Okay. Have a good weekend. Bye.